Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. Last time we completed Snow Peak Ruins and found our first mirror fragment. Now only 2 remain, and as the sages told us previously, 1 is found in a sacred grove and 1 in the heavens. There's a lot less to do before this next dungeon, however, so our usual pre-dungeon recap should be pretty brief this time. Same as we did for the last 2 dungeons, we can get an indication of where to go next back at Telma's bar. This time we're directed to meet up with our old pal Russell, who is investigating the Faron Woods. We can find him just outside the Forest Temple, and he'll tell us that he's heard legends of another temple deep in the woods which holds a sacred power. He suggests that finding said power could go a long way to helping better the Kingdom of Hyrule. To help us across the gorge here, he offers us the assistance of his partner. And no, I don't mean his wife Uli. No, he summons a golden chicken. Okay, cool. We can use the chicken to glide across the gorge and we'll find ourselves returning to the Lost Woods. Just like the last time we were here, we'll have to follow the Skull Kid to make it through the woods, while also fending off these puppet enemies. This won't take too long overall, but personally I always found this to feel a bit like padding. We've done a nearly identical sequence already earlier as Wolflink, but hey, at least it's quick overall. Not like retreading through an already completed dungeon for some mindless fetch quest while listening to these annoying people talk. No, at least we are still going towards the next dungeon. At the end of this, we'll emerge back into the Sacred Grove, which are the ruins of the Temple of Time, where we previously had found the Master Sword. But this time, we're on this ledge at the southern end of the structure where the temple entrance once stood. We can push this block out of the way, creating a shortcut back to this ruined doorway, and head back into the grove. We'll then battle some shadow beasts, creating a warp point back here. From here, it doesn't seem like there's too much to do, but if we investigate the pedestal where we previously had extracted the Master Sword, we'll find we can strike the blade back into the stone, which causes the stone guardian at the entryway to vanish. If we investigate said entryway and open the door, we'll find that it acts as a portal, which takes us back into the past. Oh yes, we'll find ourselves stepping into the Temple of Time in its glory days. The grand halls with rays of light beaming in, the music here, oh the music! It is all so nostalgic. Though the architecture here isn't one-to-one with the temple's appearance in Ocarina of Time, the stone guardians were added, the spiritual stone pedestal removed, and there is a greater amount of detail added overall. But regardless, even with these changes in detail, you can still tell that this is meant to be the very same Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time. There is just so much history in these walls here. It makes my heart swell. It's also worth noting that they didn't update the music for this place. They used the exact same track as they did for Ocarina of Time, not a remix or reorchestration even. The track is identical, and I believe they did this on purpose to drive home that association. There's a lot of interesting stuff to dissect in the architecture here, but almost all of it applies to the actual dungeon as well, so I'll save that for the next section. If we once more strike the Master Sword's pedestal, just as we did in the present day, a new path will open before us. A glowing staircase will rise, leading up to the north window of the sword chamber, revealing the entrance to the dungeon. But before we go inside, Uku shows up and races up the stairs ahead of us. Has she been following us? We'll catch up with her inside, so for now, let's head into the dungeon. This is the Temple of Time, or so we're told. I thought that was the Temple of Time. So far, Twilight Princess's dungeons have done a great job of balancing sprawling, open interconnectedness with linearity and guidedness. For example, the Forest Temple was open and interconnected via a large central room, but was still a guided experience with these monkeys showing us around. The Goron Mines was pretty much just a massive loop. Lakebed Temple leaned more into the unraveling interconnected structure without that guidedness. Arbiter's Grounds was split into two sections, with one interconnected central room-based section and one large linear loop section. And of course, Snow Peak is as labyrinthian and interconnected as it gets, as the whole dungeon spreads out, branching off of this central courtyard. So the game has been juggling these concepts gracefully, occasionally leaning into one or the other. But here in this dungeon, it turns things on its head. It goes as far into the linear format as it can, with the dungeon having very few branching paths and being as straight a shot from one end to the other as possible. But it does linear right, by having a clear objective conveyed to us from the start. That objective being that we have to travel through this gauntlet of challenges, retrieve this massive statue buddy, and then take the gauntlet in reverse while guiding the statue back to the start. With that return trip down, making use of different mechanics than our initial ascent upwards. In that sense, you can sort of view the dungeon as being one long fetch quest, or even as being an escort mission, both of those, as well as linearity, being terms that tend to have a pretty negative connotation. But let me assure you that the game takes this linear format and does it right. It crafts puzzles that test the skills we've learned up until now, and lines its various floors with swaths of enemies and traps, and wraps it all up in a dungeon that is overflowing with gorgeous architectural detail. If you weren't convinced that this dungeon was basically the polar opposite of Snow Peak Ruins, then take a look at the map. The dungeon has a whopping 8 floors, which is, to my memory, a new record for this series. Snow Peak, by comparison, had only 2 floors. Well, it had a 3rd floor that was just one room, so I just count it as 2. But the layout had us zigzagging and crisscrossing the central area constantly. This dungeon, by contrast, has a largely vertical, straightforward structure where we will be mostly moving in straight lines towards our goal. And the map reflects this with long, straight corridors and floors that are often 2 to 3 rooms at most, with almost no branches. So instead of a single floor that we'll need to pick apart like a tangled knot, we have one long string that is already laid out for us in a straight line. Again, this is not a bad thing per se, just very different from the dungeons before it. But different is good. This game is packed with dungeons, so a variety in design ideas within those dungeons is to the game's benefit overall. The architecture here is among the best in the game. The pristine reflective stone tiles, gorgeous stained glass lined pillars, rib vaulted ceilings, and ornate gold accents all strike me as having either Gothic or Anglo-Catholic inspiration overall. But more importantly for context in universe is the symbol of the light medallion, which is present in just about every room, whether it be stone tiles on the floor, etched into the sides of these massive bells, these push switches, or even on these great golden scales. The dungeon is also populated with stone mechanisms such as Armos and the huge statue buddy that we escort, which are all powered by glowing energy. Sound familiar? This all calls back to mind the Sheikah and the Tower of the Gods as seen in Breath of the Wild and Wind Waker respectively. And like those constructs, pristine is a word that frequently springs to mind for me while exploring this dungeon. While there are a few rooms that are a bit more run down, this is the dungeon that is probably in the best overall physical condition out of any other so far in the game. There's very little deterioration. The whole place is in in, for the most part, very good condition, which can't be said for any of the other dungeons so far. So who could have built this place? Obviously, this massive structure was not present in the era of the Hero of Time, and yet we've obviously been transported back in time when we entered through the temple's front doors. So in order to explore that, we'll need to step into theory territory once again. While mulling this over, my first instinct was that this place could be the very same structure as the Tower of the Gods in Wind Waker. Both are huge vertical towers featuring incredibly elaborate ornate stone and gold architecture. Both are filled with stone armos, beamos, and statue buddies that we can control and guide, all of which are powered by glowing energy. There's magical glowing stairs, stained glass, massive bells, enormous golden scales, and even this little gazebo thing is here. The similarities are plentiful. However, after reviewing the evidence a little more closely, I've come to the conclusion that they actually aren't the same place. While I still believe that it's possible the Sheikah may have used their advanced technology to build and populate both places at the behest of the goddesses whom they serve, those similarities don't necessarily mean that they're the exact same building. The Tower of the Gods does not depict the light medallion symbol anywhere, and it's a symbol that is very significant to the Temple of Time. The Temple of Time likewise lacks the constellation patterns that we see all over the Tower of the Gods. In addition to that, the Tower of the Gods was built to be a test for prospective heroes in a timeline where the Hero of Time went missing. The goddesses built it so that when a new potential hero showed up, they could prove their worth and lay claim to the Master Sword. This dungeon, on the other hand, can only be accessed by a hero already wielding the Master Sword, and is in a timeline where the Hero of Time prevented great tragedy, and our hero here in Twilight Princess was already predestined to fill this role, meaning he doesn't have to prove himself by any great trial. So while it is possible that they share similar origins, these two towers serve very different purposes. But what is that purpose here? We know the Tower of the Gods was meant to be a test for potential heroes, but the reason for this place's existence is a little bit more enigmatic. Well, the answer might be less interesting than it seems. The dungeon item here is the Dominion Rod, which is important for lore reasons, as well as the dungeon's mechanics, and the rod is kept at the very top of the tower on the 8th floor. We'll learn more about the significance of the Dominion Rod later in the game, but for now I'll say that in-game lore states that whoever holds this rod is known as the Messenger to the Heavens, so it is an important relic, and the most likely purpose of this temple is to simply guard this rod. To get it, you need to solve puzzles and make your way up to the 8th floor past various booby traps, contraptions, and automatons. All of this does raise one more question, however. Since the tower isn't present in the era of the Hero of Time, nor are there ruins of it in the present day of Twilight Princess, what exactly is going on here? What I propose is that this dungeon, while being called the Temple of Time, is actually not the Temple of Time. To clarify, the entryway structure is the Temple of Time, just like we see it in Ocarina of Time. But when we ascend up the stairs and pass through the illusionary stained glass window and through this doorway, we are instead transported to another significant place, the Temple of Light. That's what I believe this place to be. The Temple of Light is a stronghold in the center of the Sacred Realm and has been visited 2 other times in the series, in Ocarina of Time and A Link Between Worlds. In both cases, however, we only see one room, the Chamber of Sages. Here, I believe we are exploring the rest of this temple. Obviously, the light medallion symbol being omnipresent in the dungeon is one piece of evidence for this, but further to that is how we gain access to the dungeon itself, by inserting the Master Sword into the pedestal of the Sword Chamber. Sound familiar? That's because it's stated multiple times in Ocarina of Time that the key to gain access to the Temple of Light in the Sacred Realm is the Master Sword. And sure enough, in that game, when Link extracts the blade and enters his 7-year coma, where does he awaken? The Chamber of Sages in the Temple of Light. Now, Link here in Twilight Princess already has the Master Sword and doesn't have to go through any coming-of-age stasis dealio, since he's already much older than the Hero of Time was. So rather than entering some spiritual sleep, he is granted access through more conventional methods, via a magical staircase through the north window of the Sword Chamber. It's worth mentioning that this is the same window that Navi the Fairy passed through at the end of her adventure with the Hero of Time, but I don't know if that's relevant to this dungeon at all. Another detail is that door we passed through to go back in time. This is called the Door of Time, or Time Door. The Hylian text written on the door confirms as much. While passing through the Door of Time, we see this gray scaling effect, and while in the temple's past, there is this bloomy, mildly sepia tone to the lighting. Coloring effects like this are common in the series when time travel or time manipulation is involved. Just look at the frozen Hyrule Castle in Wind Waker for comparison. That said, when we pass through the doorway and emerge into the dungeon part of the temple, those effects are gone. If we were no longer in the past of Hyrule, but instead in the Sacred Realm, then it could explain the sudden change. It may also explain why the dungeon is in such pristine condition, as being located in the Sacred Realm may simply not lend itself to deterioration as quickly as a building located in Hyrule. There's another connection to the Temple of Light here as well. Aside from the light medallion symbol, of course, there are these carvings on the walls all over the place. These carvings depict 7 figures in robes. The one at the front of the procession holds the Dominion Rod, a relic that has a close connection to the gods. I believe these to represent the 7 sages, and you know what else has close ties to those sages? The room in the Temple of Light that is literally called the Chamber of Sages. It's also worth pointing out that the overall architecture here does somewhat resemble the brilliant aesthetic of Skykeep in Skyward Sword, which also might be an entryway into the Sacred Realm, since in that game we use the Master Sword to travel to an ethereal realm where we obtain the Triforce, which was said to rest in the Sacred Realm. It's worth mentioning as well that the place in Hyrule where Skykeep plummeted to the earth would be the same place where the Temple of Time is later constructed. This may all be a stretch, but there is just too much evidence for me to ignore, so that's my belief. The dungeon called the Temple of Time is in fact not the Temple of Time. Instead, we travel through the actual Temple of Time and enter the Temple of Light in the Sacred Realm. Of course, this does raise other questions, such as how these monsters got here and why the mirror fragment ended up here as well. But let's be honest, those questions would still be there even if we accepted the dungeon at face value as being the Temple of Time in the past, so I don't feel like it negates this argument. The music of this dungeon is another rather minimalist track. It's far less atmospheric and adaptive as the music for Snow Peak, instead going for a more quizzical sound, though there are still some elements of danger, such as the short opening phrase that sounds pretty similar to the eerie cave sounds of Dodongo's Cavern. And these repeated successions of heavy impact sounds that offer the impression of some mechanism tumbling into place. However, aside from those moments, the song takes a lighter approach overall, with these quizzical notes and more ethereal instrumentation. Often labeled as an underwhelming track for many people, but if I'm being honest, I like the vibe of this track quite a lot, and it fits in with Twilight Princess's minimalist approach to dungeon music perfectly. Alright, let's get into the progression. We'll enter this large foyer room where a great door stands directly ahead of us. Midna will point out that there is a statue to one side of the door and that the temple so far has been largely symmetrical, implying that there is a statue missing from the other side of the door. Sure enough, using our wolf senses, we'll see that her hunch was correct. So in order to open this great door, we'll need to find this missing statue. There's one other door at the top of the branching stairs in this room, though to reach it, we'll have to first weigh down this push switch. We'll find Uku here, where the stairs converge. She'll tell us that this is the place she's been looking to reach all this time, and so she joins us right here in this first room, beating out Snow Peak for being the earliest in the dungeon that we find her. The door at the top of the stairs is locked, but don't worry, the key can be found by finishing this very easy torch lighting puzzle. Then, spending the key, we can head up to the next room. Here we'll find the way forward blocked by this gate. We can weigh down this push switch with a pot to open it up. I like this idea where by opening one gate it closes the next one, so we have to destroy the pot after passing through the first gate in order to proceed. It's a neat idea. We can fight some Lizalfos and an Armos, and we'll find another gate blocking our path. This one can be opened via 2 switches. But before we go, make sure to grab this chest which contains the dungeon map. Heading up the stairs and through the next door, we'll emerge into the closest thing this dungeon has to a central room. There's a middle section here that's blocked by an electric barrier, so we'll come back to that soon. Instead, we'll make our way around the room, battle some Lizalfos, and use the spinner to make our way up the broken stairs here. Here on the second floor of this room are 2 more doors, connected by this circular walkway. The door on the north side of the room is locked, however, so instead we can use this elevator mechanism to go to the enclosed section on the bottom floor, nab this statuette, and return to the second floor. There's also a second statuette up here on the walkway, so you can use both of them to weigh down these switches and reach the southern door. This takes us into this stone room where we'll have to battle a pair of Armos. Just like their Wind Waker counterparts, the gem on their back is their weak point, so a well-timed backslice will be essential for these guys. Once they're defeated, a chest will appear with a small key. There's also an optional chest in here with a stamp if you want it. But now that we have that key, we can unlock that northern door in the central room and head on through. This next room has a bunch of sliding barriers that are all triggered by this gem switch. We can use our bow to take out the Beamos and strike the gem switch at a distance to manipulate these barriers and make progress. All thanks to these convenient little holes in the fencing. Make sure to duck into this alcove to grab the compass as you make your way through here. Moving on, the next room has a similar idea, but the gem switch is on a shelf up high. But the idea here is the same. Use your bow to hit the switch and open the barriers. There's some more Lizalfos to battle here as well, including these heavily armored ones, which are apparently the more dangerous Dynalfos variant. And they are certainly more challenging as they'll block your attacks to much greater effect. The next room is this massive chamber containing these huge golden scales. We can kill this swarm of baby Gomas to get an optional chest with some cash, but otherwise we can head up the stairs. There's a handful of statuettes in this room, which we can use to weigh down the scales, using this to our advantage. Now, you can choose to do this later if you'd prefer, though I usually do it now, but we can climb onto one of these small platforms, hookshot to the top of this gazebo, and use the spinner to reach the second floor balcony in this room. There's a Poe to battle here as well as a stamp, but more importantly is this side door here. Heading through, we'll find a room with some Helmasaurs and a single Armos. After defeating them, if you hookshot to the upper ledge here, you can use these statuettes and the Helmasaur's shells to weigh down these switches and open the gate here, earning us the boss key. Truth be told, I'm not fond of where this room is placed. The boss key is essential, and I just feel like this room is really easy to overlook, but that's me. Otherwise, we can return to the scales room and head through the next door. There's a lot of traps to avoid as we make our way up here, including Beamos, blade traps, spike traps, and huge bladed pendulums. Make sure to grab this key, weigh down the switch here to dispel the electric barrier, and move on. There's more baby Gomas to kill, as well as a pair of Armos. Defeating them unlocks the door, taking us to the mid-boss fight. We'll find ourselves in this huge round chamber. That missing statue we were looking for is perched on a ledge, but guarding it is an imposing armored figure. This is a Darknut, the first case of a mid-boss actually becoming a common enemy in this game, but for the purposes of this dungeon, he serves as a challenging trial. He'll attempt to block most of your attacks with his shield, so you'll need to use your hidden skills to get around his defenses. Likewise, it's best to take the route of dodging his attacks rather than trying to block them, as his massive sword swings, even when blocked successfully, will send Link reeling back. But getting past his defenses will gradually knock pieces of his armor off until he's down to just his chainmail, at which point we'll move on to the second phase of the battle. He'll throw his massive blade at you, discarding it in favor of a slimmer sword. During this second phase, the Darknut is much faster, so it's simply a matter of persistence here, but keep at him enough with your hidden skills, and eventually he'll go down. Victory here rewards us with the dungeon item, the Dominion Rod. The Dominion Rod works similar to Wind Waker's command melody, meaning that you can bring to life and control these statues. But unlike the command melody, you still retain control of Link while using the rod. So the statue here becomes your buddy that you can escort back to the start of the dungeon. This particular statue also has a giant hammer, which he can use to destroy things, which is just a ton of fun as well. We're gonna name him Buddy for the sake of this video. So now it's time for the gauntlet of challenges, but in reverse. Since he's too big to fit through doors, you'll need to guide him to these pedestals instead, which will lower a bell onto him that somehow teleports him to the next room. So bringing him back to the previous room, we can use this hammer to destroy the gate in our path, and even to defeat these Armos with a single strike. Guide him to this platform and use Link to weigh down this switch, take Buddy down the stairs here, and this time we can do the reverse, having Buddy weigh down this switch so that Link can safely pass through here. We can also now destroy the spike traps, blade traps, and Beamos. Once again, weigh down the switch, this time using a statuette, so that this platform raises and we can guide Buddy to the next bell. Next is the scale room. Because of our statue buddy's extra weight, we'll need to use more of the statuettes than before to weigh the scales down appropriately and bring him across. We can guide him to the bell here, and assuming you got the boss key already, we can move on. We'll be back in the room with the stone barriers, which we can also destroy using Buddy's hammer. It's also worth using Buddy to press this switch so that we can dispel this electric barrier and grab this piece of heart. Guide him back to this bell, and he'll be teleported over to the central room. So let's head back there. Now we can bring the elevator up to the top of the room to retrieve him and bring him down to the bottom floor. Kill all the Goma babies here to dispel the electric barrier, break some stuff, and guide him to the bell. Now that we have the Dominion Rod, we can also either break or open this gate to reach this Poe. As a side note, we also have an opportunity to go back to this room where we previously found a small key, which now will be full of baby Gomas. We can use the Dominion Rod with the statuettes to press these switches that are behind the fencing here, which reveals another optional chest with a second piece of heart. Alright, back on course, we'll head down the hallway downstairs and hookshot over to the gate here, and we can use Buddy further downstairs, breaking these gates as we go. There's one final bell here to bring him to, which teleports him back to the foyer. We can return there and guide him back to his spot across from his twin here, and this will open that great stone door. Alright, hopefully you remembered to grab that boss key upstairs, because from here, it's a straight shot down this deteriorated hallway full of traps, where we'll need to open this gate like before, and we'll finally reach the boss door.
Triple jumping.
The boss room is a massive stone chamber with several large statues and a handful of skylights, but it won't be long before one of the lights is blotted out and the boss reveals itself. A massive spider with a single giant eyeball. Oh, heebie-jeebies. Ugh. This is Armagoma, and she's probably one of the bosses that I have the most mixed feelings about. From a visual standpoint, Armagoma is detailed and well designed, but I don't know, maybe just going for the giant spider look feels somewhat unoriginal to me. Iterations of Goma have varied from giant crab monsters to giant centipede monsters to giant unidentifiable arachnid monsters with pretty original designs. So I guess it isn't out of the question, in my opinion, for Goma to take on a more spider-like appearance. It just also doesn't seem as inspired a design. It's just kind of average, and I think I've more than made clear my stance on the giant eyeball trope in Zelda games, though at least this game has mostly steered clear of that so far, so I'll give it a pass here. The music here, while certainly dramatic, also falls short for me. It just feels a little less inspired, especially coming off the heels of the awesome boss music for Stalord and Blazetta, which were incredibly bombastic and dangerous tracks. This one just feels underwhelming to me. It's not bad by any means, but it pales in comparison to the other boss battle themes in the game, and just strikes me as generic. From a gameplay standpoint, this boss fight doesn't fare much better. While Goma is on the ceiling, we'll need to use the bow to shoot her giant eyeball. If done correctly, she'll land on her back near one of these giant statues. We can use the Dominion Rod to then take control of the statue and smash her underbelly. Maybe it's just me, but it almost feels like they were struggling to figure out how to include the item in this battle here. But I don't know, it just feels so absurdly easy to win this fight. She'll also deploy some babies to fight you and shoot a giant laser at you, but neither of these are particularly threatening if I'm being honest. It's too bad, honestly. Goma is a staple reoccurring boss whose appearances date all the way back to Zelda 1, but Armagoma here just feels like a wasted opportunity in my opinion. Had they cranked up the difficulty, found a better use for the item, or even dropped using it in the fight to begin with, this could have been an even better battle. Imagine this, what if the armor on Goma could have been used with the Dominion Rod instead of these giant statues, forcing us to manually disassemble her exoskeleton in order to expose a weak spot, all the while avoiding her attacks? Or what if we got a tense, nightmarish boss fight being chased down a dark tunnel like those old beta trailers of Twilight Princess teased us with? But alas, it's just a simple matter of shooting the eyeball and then Hulk smashing her with these statues, rinse, repeat. After a bit of that, we'll move on to the second phase of the battle. The game will psych us out, making us think we've won, but then it turns out that the eyeball is like the abdomen of a smaller Goma that was inside the bigger Goma? I don't really even know. But for this second phase of the battle, Goma will be much faster and oh, she's already dead. Really? One hit? Literally one hit? Alright then. We'll get the mirror fragment and heart container as usual, and we're out. So, that's the dungeon. Overall, the Temple of Time, or rather, the Temple of Light as I like to think, is a pretty big change of pace for dungeon progression in this game. Rather than having loops or sprawling interconnectedness, the dungeon is a straight line from one end to the other, followed by the same line in reverse, acting as an escort mission. On paper, everything about that should make for a dungeon that I don't care for, and yet, I love this dungeon. It's a great shakeup compared to prior dungeons, and diversity in level design is always good. Plus, that backtracking while escorting our statue buddy is made easier by the fact that he can destroy most obstacles in your path with ease. While I don't think that it's my favorite dungeon in the game, I can't help but admire how seamlessly this dungeon accomplishes what it sets out to do, and that is to make an escort mission good. It's also brimming full of architectural detail, which makes my Zelda fan brain run wild with ideas. Ideas I hope I've articulated well in this video. I can't help but want to know more about this place, and I can't help but admire how gorgeous it is. Having it connected to the Temple of Time in the past just tickles that sense of nostalgia in just the right way as well. It's brilliant stuff, bridging the gap between our first adventure on the N64 and this game. Of course, it's not perfect. I do have some complaints. For example, that second piece of heart is a little too out of the way in my opinion. We visit this room early on to nab a key, and it would be absurdly easy to breeze past it on our return trip and miss out. This one feels somewhat excusable though, since at least it's an optional pickup, and is certainly less egregious than that one chest in Lakebed Temple that had a stamp. My next complaint is a bit less forgivable for me though, and that is that the boss key is also too easy to overlook. The rest of the dungeon is so streamlined and linear that having something as essential as the boss key tucked out of the way like this just feels like it breaks the flow of the dungeon progression for me. I can only imagine how many players made it all the way back to the boss door on the first floor, only to realize that they've missed something and have to turn back and backtrack all the way up to the 7th floor to get it. If they had just better telegraphed that this was an important place to visit, not an optional spot to grab a secret, then that could have gone a long way. And of course, my last complaint is the boss itself. It just feels unoriginal and uninspired in my opinion. We've seen iterations of Goma before in the series, done in ways that just feel more original, and I know they had some great ideas here that they ended up not implementing into the game, so it feels like a missed opportunity. While it's not the worst boss ever made, it's just kind of passable in my opinion. But all things considered, this dungeon still excels in many ways with its various challenges, and those complaints are certainly not deal breakers for me. In fact, despite all of that, I like this dungeon a lot. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to the lovely people who support me on Patreon, as well as my channel members, in particular those who supported at the cheese tier or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, Grey Mage, Hylian Historian, Gale, Ethan3G, and Clifford. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.